Beating the spread championship game tonight and give you who to bet in the Alabama-Georgia matchup. Also, after the prediction of the game, I will give you the top 3 prop bets. And I want to remind you all that the Grueling Truth is powered by betting.net. Betting.net is not just your best bet for finding the online casino or sportsbook that's right for you. Check out betting.net. If you're in New York now, you can legally bet. So if you're in the New York area, go to betting.net, click on there, and it'll give you the best place to vote or to bet on the national championship game tonight. All right, Alabama versus Georgia. I think this is where everybody kind of figured this was happening. Georgia's favored by 2.5 tonight. And kickoff scheduled for 8 o'clock at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana. The game will be televised on ESPN. Alabama is looking to win its 7th national championship under Coach Nick Saban. The Crimson Tide are in the championship game for the 6th time in 8 years. And Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young leads an offense that ranks 3rd in the FBS at 41.4 points a game. They dominated the Cincinnati Bearcats, winning 27-6 in a Cotton Bowl to reach here. Georgia reasserted its defensive dominance in a 34-11 victory against Michigan in the Orange Bowl. The Bulldogs lead the FBS in scoring defense at just 9.6 points per game. Stetson Bennett led a big play offense. Coach Kirby Smart will get another shot at Alabama on the big stage. He's had 2 other shots and has fallen short. Now, it's a rematch of the SEC championship game, which Alabama won 41-24. It's also a rematch of the 2017 college football championship game, which the Crimson Tide won in overtime 26-23. Will the Bulldogs flip the script, or will the Crimson Tide pile on yet another national championship? Here is everything you'll need to know to bet on the game tonight successfully between Alabama and Georgia. Now, we have some trends here we have to look at. Number one, the spread is Georgia minus 2.5. The over-under is 52.5. Alabama has won 7 straight meetings against Georgia, a streak that dates back to 2008. This is the 5th straight top 5 matchup between the programs. The Crimson Tide are 8-6 against the spread this season. Alabama was an underdog for the first time since October 31st, 2015 in the SEC championship game matchup against Georgia. And the Crimson Tide are 2-0 against the spread in games with spreads less than 14 points this season. Georgia's 9-5 against the spread this season, but they are 5-1 when the spread is less than 20 points. All right, guys, let's go ahead, and we're going to look at 3 things to watch in this championship game tonight. Number one, Stetson Bennett. Now, Stetson Bennett's a guy who silenced his critics, at least for a week, by passing for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 34-11 beating of the Michigan Wolverines. The Bulldogs quarterback has completed 58.8% of his passes for an average of 304.5 yards in the last 2 meetings against Alabama. But that comes with 5 TDs and 5 interceptions. Bennett's favorite target in the last meeting was tight end Brock Bowers, who had 10 catches for 139 yards. Alabama quarterback Josh Jobe is out for the season, and Jalon Armour-Davis left the semifinal against Cincinnati with a hip injury. Well, those injuries in Alabama's secondary lead to even more passing efficiency for Bennett. It's going to have to if they're going to win this game. Now, key number 2 is missing Michie. All right, it didn't really hurt them that they didn't have John Michie in the game against Alabama. Alabama offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien favored a run-heavy attack in the semifinal game against the Bearcats. And All-American wide receiver Jamison Williams took on more of a possession role with 7 catches for 62 yards. Ja'Cory Brooks and Slade Bolden caught TD passes, and tight end Jaleel Billingsley could be a sleeper target in this matchup. So, let's go ahead and who wrecks this game? Now, when we look at that, I think given the injuries in the secondary, Alabama defensive coordinator Pete Golding could dial up the pressure with linebacker Will Anderson Jr. and Christian Harris. They combined for 11 tackles in the first meeting, and Anderson had a sack in that game. Georgia, meanwhile, did not have a sack in the first meeting. All-Americans Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean responded from that with a dominant performance in the semifinal matchup against Michigan, but this is not Michigan. So when we look at this game, the thing that struck me the first time they played was the fact that Georgia rushed Alabama with just 4. And I think a lot of people thought that Alabama's offensive line was down this year, which it has been compared to previous years. But in the semifinal game against Cincinnati, in that SEC championship game against Alabama, they blocked exceedingly well, and it looked like the Bama defense or offensive lines of old. Now, this stat that matters into this game. The longest running play in the first matchup between these two teams was 15 yards. Which team can support their quarterback with a running game more? James Cook led Georgia with just 38 yards rushing in the first meeting. That is not enough to beat Alabama. He had 112 yards receiving in the semifinal against Michigan and could be used in that role to isolate Alabama's linebackers. Brian Robinson, meanwhile, went off the charts against the Cincinnati Bearcats, 26 carries for 204 yards. And Robinson kept the Bulldogs honest with 16 carries for 55 yards in the SEC championship game. But Alabama will have to do a better job running the ball in this game also if they want to win. So, when we look at who to pick to win in this game, I actually think if you look at these teams overall, Georgia's probably a better team. This won't be a blowout like last time. But the issue I have here is at quarterbacks. Stetson Bennett had a great game against Michigan. This is not Michigan's defense. This is Alabama. And last two performances, he's thrown 5 interceptions in those 2 games. Any turnovers tonight, they're in deep trouble. The other advantage here is Bryce Young's the quarterback at Alabama. Bryce Young, I think, if he came out right now, maybe the first pick in the NFL draft, he's that good. And against the Cincinnati Bearcats, the Bearcats secondary is better than Georgia's. They blitzed him. They put pressure on him. They held him to only 182 yards passing. But the thing about Bryce Young in that game was, he's getting rushed. He's scrambling all over the place. He'll just all of a sudden see a guy over here at 5 yards complete the pass and, continue to get positive yardage. Bryce Young is significantly better than Stetson Bennett. The other position that is huge here is head coach, because Kirby Smart, I don't think, has lived up to his name of smart. And when you look at that, I'm going to agree with Joe here, who says Alabama has the best defensive front in college football. They're a wall. I agree. And if Georgia cannot run the ball, this is going to be a very long game for them. And I think the difference here is Nick Saban is maybe the greatest college football coach of all time. Probably not even maybe anymore. He just is. Kirby Smart's a guy that has a tendency to screw things up. So with that being said, I'm going to take Alabama. And I'm not going to take Alabama minus 2.5. I'm going to take Alabama straight up. I think it's at plus 116 or 118 right now. But I'm going to take the Crimson Tide because, how many times are the Crimson Tide an underdog? So you can bet it, take the 2.5 points. But to give you a difference here is if you bet $50 on Alabama to win straight up, you get $58. If you bet Alabama in the -2, you win $47. $11 difference on a $50 bet's not huge, but why not make a little bit of extra money? Do you really believe when it comes down to it at the end of the game, Kirby Smart's going to make the right choices compared to Nick Saban and get you to win? I'm going to go with Alabama. Now, we're going to look at something else that I think is interesting, which are the top 3 prop bets for this game. And the prop bets are always fun. And when I look at it, the number 1 prop bet to me, George Pickens, receiving yards over 34.5 is a -110. Now, Georgia receiver George Pickens has fought hard to overcome an ACL injury and be healthy enough to contribute down the stretch. He's a dynamic pass catcher. He showcased his ability to rack up yards after the catch when he held in 2 passes for 41 yards against the Crimson Tide in the SEC championship game. With a few more weeks of conditioning under his belt, I think Pickens will have an opportunity to find the open gaps given the defense should be focused on shutting down tight end Brock Bowers after the last game. So, really, he probably only needs 2 or 3 catches to eclipse 34 receiving yards. So, I'm taking the over on George Pickens and 34.5 yards. Now, the other 2, we've got Bryce Young, rushing yards, over 12.5 is -110. This number simply seems too low. Bryce Young isn't known for his rushing capabilities, but he has proven he isn't afraid to tuck the ball and run if need be. The Heisman Trophy winner carried the ball 3 times against Georgia the last time these two teams met for 40 yards on the ground. Keep in mind that running back Brian Johnson is also coming off a game in which he ran the ball 27 times. Look for Young to take some of the pressure off by taking the ball himself, so remember, Georgia couldn't sack him the last game either. They only rushed 4. Are they going to blitz? If they blitz him, which I think they're going to have to do sometimes, They're going to open up a couple creases. I think Bryce Young runs the ball 4 or 5 times for 45, 50 yards. I think the over 12.5 is a safe bet. My third prop bet is Slade Bolden. Anytime touchdown scorer, it's plus 210, more than 2 to 1. So I think bettors who are looking to get a little bit more bang for their buck should target wide receiver Slade Bolden for Alabama, who, when looking at anytime touchdown scorer props, remember, you already got the top Alabama receiver out. And while Bolden is no means a household name, he's come on strong when it matters the most. The junior has caught a touchdown pass in 2 of Alabama's last 3 games. He torched Georgia for 54 receiving yards on 5 receptions in early December. The Crimson Tide are going to have to be sneaky facing a defense that hardly gives up points in the red zone. So you could double your money here by taking Slade Bolden. So remember, on our prop bets, Slade Bolden, anytime touchdown scorer, over 2 to 1 odds. Bryce Young, rushing yards over 12.5 yards. George Pickens, take the over. Georgia wide receiver at 34.5 yards. And for the game, take the Crimson Tide to win the game. All right, guys, remember, betting.net is not just sports betting. Betting.net compares the best online casinos. Sit back, relax, and play the top online slots, poker, and table games. All right, guys, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You can follow me on The Grueling Truth, at Grueling Truth through Twitter. Make sure you like us on Facebook. You can hear us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, almost anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for now, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been watching and listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.